Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final session of 2021 Kerala Architecture Festival, commonly known as SPACES, Festival of Culture, Politics and Design, modeled after Kerala Literature Festival. Today we are going to discuss the topic, Mumbai, the big city. I am Professor Michi Matthew from DC School of Principal, DC School of Architecture and Design, Trivandrum, and will be co-hosting this event tonight. Kerala Architecture Festival is an event promoted by Kizhakemuri Foundation, DC School of Architecture and Design, both Trivandrum and Vagamon campuses, along with DC Books on similar lines of Kerala Literature Festival, one of India's largest literature events. Tonight in Kerala Architecture Festival, we are putting the spotlight on Mumbai, formerly known as Bombay under the British Raj. It originally consisted of 7 islets lying off the Konkan coast of Western India. Commonly known as a gateway to India, Mumbai is extremely crowded and housing is scarce, making the city highly vertical in nature. The city is truly cosmopolitan in nature, and almost every Indian language is spoken in this city. Our speaker for tonight, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, is here to speak to us about Mumbai, the big city and the big story behind it. Mr. Jairam Ramesh is an Indian economist and a member of the Rajya Sabha. He graduated from IIT Bombay in 1975 and did his master's from Carnegie Mellon University in Public Policy and Public Management. Mr. Jairam Ramesh is a founding member of the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad and is a member of the International Council of the New York-based Asia Society. Apart from authoring multiple books on history and politics, Mr. Jairam Ramesh has been a columnist for the Business Standard, Business Today, The Telegraph, Times of India, and India Today under the pen name Kautilya. He has served as the Minister of State for Power, Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, Minister of State for Environment and Forests, as well as Cabinet Minister of Rural Development and Drinking Water and Sanitation. Welcome, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, to this 2021 online edition of Kerala Architecture Festival.
Thank you very much, Meji. First of all, I'm very glad to be here, but I'm still wondering why I'm here. Because I'm not an urban planner, I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert on any city, and I don't live in Mumbai. However, when I look back on my life, I did spend 12 years of school and college, university in what was then Bombay. And since then, I've had association with the city, first Bombay, then Mumbai, in different forms. And I was just thinking, my undergraduate thesis, which I had to write in 1974-75, when I was at the final year at the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai. My final year thesis, I was a mechanical engineering student. My final year undergraduate thesis was actually on urban planning. It was on a new model of urban planning, and I presented that paper at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And therefore, the only expertise I can claim for being here this evening with all of you, apart from having spent 12 years of my formative years of my life in Bombay, it was not Mumbai when I was there, and having produced this undergraduate thesis on urban planning, perhaps gives me some standing. But let me say that Mumbai, to me, represents aspiration at its best. It represents cosmopolitanism at its best. It represents commercial India at its best. It's no wonder that Suketu Mehta wrote this wonderful book and called Mumbai the maximum city. It's maximum in every regard. And therefore, I think it's a city that represented a different facet of India. Calcutta or Kolkata represented the British Raj in all its glory, Delhi, of course, represented and continues to represent Indian political history going back to centuries. We have other cities. We have the cities of Madras, later become Chennai, and of course we have the cities of Bengaluru, formerly Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, which emerged in the last 30, 40 years. But to me, Bombay or Mumbai still retains a charm of its own. It's still a city that you can go to, whichever part of India you're from. It's a city that is not based on any hierarchy of birth, any hierarchy of wealth. It's a city where I still feel that amongst all the cities, it's a city of maximum mobility. However, when I look at the city from the outside, what strikes me from an urban planning point of view, and what it struck me in 1975 when I wrote my own thesis, was the sharp cleavages, the sharp differences that were there in habitation patterns, in the urban habitat in Bombay, in Mumbai. And this was very evident in the population, the slum population. This was very evident, for example, in the manner in which Dharavi grew in the 70s and later on in the 80s. But we, tend to look, we professionals, particularly economists and development planners, tend to look down upon slums. But as Dharavi has demonstrated, slums are habitations. In fact, the word slum is a very ugly word. These are habitations. The habitations are really centers of great social capital. And we've seen, for example, in COVID 19, how Dharavi, which was expected to be a hotspot, actually turned out to be a relatively better managed habitation when it came to infection rates compared to the other more affluent parts of the city. But it's striking. What strikes you in Bombay, of course, is the habitation pattern. On the one side, you have South Bombay, the opulence of South Bombay, the skyscrapers of South Bombay. And then, of course, you have, as you move to the north, the northwest, and the northeast, you have a completely different pattern of habitation. And one of the things that saved Bombay, of course, I use Bombay and Mumbai interchangeably. I lapse into Bombay because of my memory. One of the things that really underpinned Bombay was the public transportation system. You had the suburban train system, which is a British legacy, of course, taken forward after independence. And then you had, of course, a very efficient bus transit system, BEST. It really was best in the country. And the combination of the rail system and the road transportation system gave to this city, this sprawling metropolis, a transportation system that other cities could only aspire to. It's a city of great density, the density of population, and therefore, it has all the attendant consequences of a city with such a density of population. Of course, by definition, cities are habitations of high density, but Bombay is also a city characterized by vertical growth in many parts and horizontal sprawl in some other parts. So managing both the horizontal sprawl and the vertical growth is a special challenge for urban planners. I think the other issue that Bombay or Mumbai has thrown up in the last couple of years, particularly, is the ecological stress that cities in India, are being subjected to increasingly. Mumbai has the problems normal problems associated with urban planning. But my memories of Bombay, of course, are firmly anchored in the monsoon. And we know now that the pattern of behavior of the Indian monsoon has been altered very, very significantly by global warming and the uncertainties of climate change. The amount of rainfall we get has not changed very appreciably, but the number of wet days, intensely wet days, has gone up. So we're getting the same rainfall in a compressed time frame. Added to this, of course, is the ecological stresses caused in the city by a diversion of rivers, by the inability in Mumbai because of the demographic and the pressure on space from commercial enterprise to develop green areas which would provide some carbon sink for the citizens of the city. Now, a lot of these problems I had to face when I was Minister for Environment, and the proposal for building a new international airport in Navi Mumbai came up. Navi Mumbai was, of course, the satellite town that was envisaged many, many years ago and came to fruition really in the 70s and 80s. There were two big projects in Mumbai that attracted attention. One was the Back Bay reclamation that had been going on for many years. And the other one, of course, was the building of this new city, New Bombay, Navi Mumbai. And when I was Minister for Environment between 2009 and 2011, the proposal to build a new international airport came for my examination and approval, and I discovered, to my astonishment, that the ecological problems that would be caused in the city by the diversion of rivers, by the blasting of mountains, and most importantly, the loss of mangrove forests, which are a natural bioshield, as the tsunami demonstrated. These had not been reckoned as part of environmental appraisal. And it took me almost a year to convince my colleagues that, while Bombay does require an international airport, a new international airport, and maybe Navi Mumbai is a good location, but the present location, the location that was being proposed then, had very grave ecological consequences that would be felt not only in Navi Mumbai, but also Purani and also in the old city of Mumbai. And then subsequently, a lot of modifications and changes took place in the configuration. And now, of course, the project is under implementation. And I can only keep my fingers crossed that the conditions that governed the approval for this project, particularly as they related to restoration of the mangroves, which were going to be destroyed in the process of building this airport, would be taken into serious consideration. Now, there are other issues concerning urban areas which are exemplified by the experience of Mumbai. Delhi, of course, is an exception in this regard because it has, very substantial green cover. But most cities in India, because of the pressure of roads, because of the pressure of infrastructure, because of the demographic pressure, are not able to maintain carbon sinks of the type, for example, that Delhi or even Bengaluru has been able to maintain. And we see this in Bombay. I grew up in Powai, which was right next to the RM Milk colony, which was a sprawling milk colony that had come up in the 50s and 60s. And in the last couple of years, you may have read about the destruction of the forest cover that would be caused by the building of metro sheds in the RM Milk colony area, which adjoins the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, the Borivali. And there was a people's agitation, and the new government came, and the new chief minister of Maharashtra, who's a very keen environmentalist, and his son, who's also a minister, forest minister, took a very bold and courageous step that the city of Bombay requires infrastructure. The city of Bombay requires a metro, but at the same time, the city of Bombay requires the building of green cover, building of carbon sinks. And as global warming and as climate change impact continues in the manner it has, the pressure on urban governments to maintain carbon sinks and to maintain ecological balance is going to come under greater emphasis, and cities like Mumbai, particularly, will be called upon to pay far greater attention to the ecological consequences of building their infrastructure. Now, there are many issues in the city of Mumbai, where this trade-off between growth and environment is very apparent. There are large areas of salt pans, which have, where builders have looked upon for many years, but those areas have been left relatively untouched. There have also been a lot of proposals for, building infrastructure along the coastline and building sea links. We already have one sea link, but there are other links that are proposed. But we also know that one of the definite consequences of climate change is the increase in mean sea levels. And cities like Mumbai, port cities like Mumbai, are going to be affected very, very substantially by this. So, this trade off between environment on the one side, ecology on the one side, climate change on the one side, and the need for physical infrastructure to allow mobility. Because the jobs are still in central and South Bombay. They have not been dispersed across the city, and therefore there is still movement of people, which requires public infrastructure. So, I mean, these are very important issues that city planners in Mumbai have to grapple with. There are, of course, other environmental issues which are now an integral part of city planning. Not just related to climate change, but also related to the loss of biodiversity, to the buildup of aerosol and particulate matter in the atmosphere because of pollution. And we have very many parts of India, of Mumbai particularly, where the public health consequences of chemical contamination and pollution are becoming very, very evident. For example, there is a suburb called Chembur, which has a refinery, which has a power plant, which had a fertilizer plant, and the combined environmental load on pollution, on contamination, on land degradation, very, very substantial. Now, one of the assets of Mumbai, has been the municipal corporation. It's a very rich corporation. It's a very professional corporation, as we have seen in the way the corporation has responded to the COVID-19 crisis. But I would think that in the years to come, the autonomy that the corporation enjoys will have to be substantially enhanced and increased. And of course, we have the 74th Amendment to the Constitution, which empowers municipal bodies. We have the 73rd Amendment, which empowers the panchayats. And we have the 74th Amendment, which empowers the municipal bodies. But as a country, we have been more successful in the 73rd Amendment and less successful in the 74th Amendment. So the ability of local bodies like the BMC, to raise resources on their own, to spend on physical and social infrastructure on their own, and not be dependent on subventions from the state exchequer or the central exchequer, will have to very substantially increase, which means better systems of property tax collection, for example, which is, of course, the most important source of revenue as far as local governments are concerned. Octroi used to be a very important source for the BMC, but with the introduction of GST, that has gone, and so one very important source of revenue for the local government has disappeared, and the dependence of the local government on the state government and on the central exchequer has increased. This is not a very desirable phenomenon because I believe that cities like Mumbai have to be more self governing. And for being self governing, they have to be financially more self reliant than they have been so far. The Bombay Municipal Corporation has a long and distinguished history of throwing up political leaders. It's an arena of intense political competition amongst all political parties in the city. But I think in the years to come, that's one area that will occupy center stage of policy attention. When I was growing up in Mumbai, the textile mills were an integral part of the city. And Bombay was really, in many ways, defined by the textile mills. But in the 1980s, you had the great strike in the textile mills, engineered by the very well known labor leader Datta Samant. And we have seen the decline of the textile mills in Bombay, particularly in the central part of the city, where today the real estate where the textile mills were located now have been replaced by either residential properties or by commercial establishments. In fact, one of the big buildings now where a textile mill used to be very prominent in the early part of the 20th century, one of the big properties is called Trump Towers. And a few years ago, I went and I was quite surprised to see Trump Towers in Lower Parel. But the problems that the Mumbai city faced, from the decline of the textile industry, the city is still coming to grips with the consequences of the loss of employment and the change in land use that has been triggered by the decline of this textile mills, which were right, in the middle of the city. So this is another issue that is of particular relevance as far as Mumbai is concerned. The other issue, of course, is migration, and Mumbai has always been a magnet for migration. People have come to Mumbai from all parts of the country, and they've come to Mumbai in order to work both in the informal sector and in the formal sector. Now, I grew up at a transition period. I grew up in a Bombay that was completely cosmopolitan. But I could see in the later part of the 70s and the early part of the 80s, I could begin to see, the birth of a native son of the soil movement, which then, of course, became very much an integral part of the politics of the state. But it still, in spite of all those issues, in spite of all the problems, it still continues to attract migrants from different parts of the country, particularly from the northern part of the country. And what this does is, like Kerala, is dependent on remittances from the Gulf and from countries in West Asia. Large parts of India, Bihar, large parts of Orissa, large parts of Jharkhand are dependent on remittances from workers working in Bombay and remitting money back to their families and homes in parts of eastern India and northern India. So this remittance economy is still very, very important. But the growth of the formal sector and the employment has almost stagnated. No new industry is coming up, in and around Bombay to compensate for the loss of jobs. Something like 3 to 4 lakh jobs got lost because of the decline and closure of the textile mills. And there's been no compensating growth in the formal organized sector. All the growth has been in the unorganized sector, in the informal sector of the economy, and now, of course, in the service sector of the economy. So, this again is a challenge that urban planners, particularly in places in cities like Mumbai, will face the transition in the structure of employment away from manufacturing, which used to be, by the way, one of the mainstays of Mumbai. Not only old metal manufacturing, metal bashing, but also chemical industry, which was very important in the Thana Belapur belt. And that, of course, has run its course for a variety of reasons. And so, therefore, while migration continues, the pressure to find jobs will also commensurately increase. Migration causes, as we now know, a lot of social tensions and social challenges caused by difference in cultures, difference in languages. But this migration is going to be a continuing phenomenon in India. We already see, for example, even in the south, even in Karnataka, even in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, a lot of the service sector jobs, the lower end, carpenters, plumbers, construction labor, people come from Orissa, people come from Jharkhand, people come from Bengal, Chhattisgarh. So, this migration pattern is going to continue because of the demographic imbalance. You have large parts of India where fertility rates, have reached replacement levels, and you have parts of India where population is continuing to grow, and therefore migration really is the only way, to meet the employment challenge. So this is something that is an integral part. This is, in fact, defined Bombay. It defined Mumbai in many ways, and I think that's going to continue to play a very important role. So, I could go on. Everybody of us, we all know how Bollywood has defined, how Mumbai is the home of Bollywood. For many, many years, Mumbai was the home of all the great cricketers of India, all the great footballers of India. All that, we have grown up with those images of Mumbai. Subsequently, of course, we've had other cities, other urban areas that came up. First, it was Hyderabad, then it was Bangalore, then it was Pune, Indore, number of cities that came up. But Mumbai was somewhat unique. It was a city in which public investment didn't play a very important role. For example, of the type that public investment has played in the growth of Hyderabad or Bangalore, for example. But it's a city in which private enterprise, in which private entrepreneurship really has been the locomotive of growth and expansion in the city, and that really has defined Mumbai. Uh, in the last 25 years, as the structure of the Indian economy has changed, Mumbai has lost its relative importance. First, Calcutta used to be the important city, commercial sector. Then it shifted to Bombay, and then subsequently, the shift has taken place, to the south, to Bangalore, to Hyderabad, as I mentioned, to Pune. And in some ways, I think this is part of the process of economic transformation. This is part of the process of economic change. Economic growth becomes more dispersed. Cities grow, and cities decline. The real challenge is, how do you manage this process of change? And increasingly, as I started off with, uh, by saying, and I'll end here, increasingly the challenges are not just economic, not just social, which we all know, but also ecological, which we are coming to terms with, which we are trying still to understand. And I think Mumbai is a classic case study where the economic, the social, and the ecological all converge to make it a fascinating place. So I gather that you have had similar sessions on Chennai, on Kolkata, on Tiruvananthapuram, on Kochi, on Calicut, Kozhikode, and Delhi, and this is the seventh city. So my observations today are really, as somebody who grew up in the city, who has since the early 80s seen the city from the outside, and seen the city grow, seen the city decline, seen the city change in its character, but continue to be fascinated by the city because I think it's all said and done, in spite of all the knocks that it has taken in the last couple of years, last couple of decades, really, Mumbai still represents aspirational India at its best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, for that very interesting take on the maximum city. You covered, started off with Dharavi and its challenges as well as opportunities out there. The public transportation system, the vertical growth and the horizontal sprawl of the city, the migratory nature of the city, the changing land use and economic pattern of Mumbai as a city, as well as the ecological stress that the city is facing. They were all brought forth by you. And you gave us a very comprehensive picture of Mumbai, the big city, as we call it, or it's like a dream city to a lot of migrants, as you said. It's not just migrants, but all over people all over India. It is a dream city, and they dream it as a big city. It was the only big city in those days. So thank you for giving that very. I mean, you took us through a journey, and thank you so much for that. And uh, I know you are not in a position to take up questions today because of your lack
No,
of
no, we'll take
time.
a. I have time. I have time.
You are
If there
you
are
have time.
questions, yes, 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 please.
Okay. What do you see as a future for this city now? Now that we've already had a satellite city to this Mumbai, we already have had Navi Mumbai as a satellite city, and look, the growth is not slowing down; it's only increasing in terms of population growth. So, what do you think would be the kind of a future to this city?
No, actually, the population of Mumbai has not grown very significantly. If you take
Okay.
the census data, there has been a slight dip in the
Okay.
population of
Uh-huh.
Mumbai. So,
That's
but
good.
what people have been, there are other centers around Mumbai, Greater Mumbai, you had Navi Mumbai. And as public transportation expands, as infrastructure expands, people, will move out of what we consider to be the boundaries of traditional Mumbai, traditional Bombay. So, what do I consider the future of the city? Um, well, the future, certainly going by the experience of the last 25, 30 years, the IT revolution came in other cities. It didn't come in Mumbai. It came in Bangalore, it came in Hyderabad, it came in Pune, it came in Chennai. It certainly didn't come in Bombay. It contributes, but it's not a great contributor. Of course, all the big companies continue to be have their commercial establishments in Mumbai, and Mumbai continues to have Bollywood. In spite of everything else, Bollywood is Bollywood, right? But Bombay has lost its preeminence. It's lost its preeminence in sports. Once upon a time, it was preeminent in the arts. It continues to be a very important center. But this is inevitable in the process of economic transformation. That new cities come up, new urban areas come up, and therefore you have to find ways and means of dealing, with this transformation. I, for one, don't get disheartened because I feel that these are inevitable. You see new centers come up. The growth of cities and the decline of cities are inevitable consequence. But it's amazing. If you go to Mumbai, you don't get a sense that Mumbai is in decline. It's always on the move. It's a 24/7 city.
Yes.
I can't think of any other city in India other than Kolkata, perhaps. Which is a 24/7 city. It's always on the move. You can. It's People are moving. So that's what I mean by saying that people go to the first dream, is to go to Mumbai. Maybe it's sort of it is implanted in our minds because of the films that we see.
Yes, it's a glitzy,
यही है
glitzy world. Yeah.
यही है Bombay Meri Jaan. You remember, the famous song. So the city continues to attract people. It's not as if, but population. It's not a city that is facing great demographic pressure. It's not bursting
Yes.
demographically.
You did mention
So
about the. Yeah, sorry.
But the
Go ahead.
ecological problems of Mumbai are going to be very, very significant. I think that's where, because Mumbai needs infrastructure. Infrastructure does have environmental implications, and we have seen, for example, the manner in which rivers have got diverted, in which the manner in which the mangroves have been lost, green cover has been lost. And growth has to be vertical. I mean, India is a land scarce country. So the pattern of urbanization in India cannot be the type of pattern of urbanization that we see in the US, for example. Can't be horizontal sprawl. It has to be vertical growth.
So Bombay has been many times been. I mean, it's been kind of touched against New York. I mean, it's been like, okay, it's like the city never sleeps. Very similar to the New York. New York is also a vertical city. It's again another
Yeah,
coastal
I mean,
city.
New York is the New York Washington comparison. Washington is like Delhi, Bombay is like New York. New York is a
Yeah.
magnet, for internationally. Bombay is a magnet nationally. Even today, people go. Uh, but every time I go to Bombay, as I said, I don't get a sense that it's decaying. You don't see decay. You see decline, of course. I mean, jobs have been lost. As I gave you the example of the textile industry,
Yes.
which was an integral part of Bombay, and then the chemical industry, which was an integral part, not of Bombay proper, but of the surroundings of
Suburbs.
Bombay,
Yeah.
the suburbs of Bombay, Thana Belapur, Industrial
Yeah.
Belt, the MSME belt. This was really the
Yes.
MSME enterprises and the big chemical companies. So that has changed, and that certainly has changed. Uh, but it's interesting, when I look back on my childhood, you had the suburbs of Bombay, you had Ghatkopar, I remember, and it used to be dominated by the Gujaratis. Kurla used to have a dominant Muslim population. Then you had Matunga, which had the South Indian. This was a largely South Indian concentration. You had Dada, which used to be the center for the Parsis. It still is, by the way. So it's very interesting. In Bombay, communities coalesced, and you had communities defining suburbs in many ways. Bandra, for example, used to be the place where you had a very large Christian population, right? Local Christian population. So communities got associated with suburbs of Bombay. Very interesting. When I grew up, I used to be always struck by this pattern of urbanization. But that, of course, has changed. That yeah, there's been more. It's more of a melting pot. I mean, if there is
Yes.
one melting pot in India, it's Bombay. I mean, it still
Yes.
is a big melting pot. In spite of
People
all the
from.
problems, in spite of all the agitations, in spite of all the language that is used against the migrants, I still feel that it's a city that attracts a lot of people.
You had mentioned the monsoons. I mean, there is a magic to monsoons, of course. Anywhere on the western coast, Konkan entire coast is a magic. But at the same time, it also this the large scale flooding that Mumbai has been facing for so many
Well,
years now.
management of floods. You see, the point
Yes,
is monsoon, the amount of rain that we are getting has not changed, but that rain is coming in a shorter period. You're
very short
getting more
periods.
intense rain in a shorter period. That
There
has
is a
implications
resilience.
for flooding.
I find there is a
It is
resilience in Mumbai. It's how they face it
yes,
year after
you
year. You know.
absolutely. Without planning for it in many ways over a period of time, the city has developed the resilience. And I remember Bombay used to be a city very safe for women. In the electric trains, there used to be suburban trains. There used to be
Yes.
separate compartments for women. Comparatively, I'm talking of compared to some other cities of India. So yeah, I mean, ecology wise, yeah, I mean the monsoon, particularly urban heat, that's a very serious issue. Not as serious in places like Ahmedabad or Vijayawada,
Yeah.
but certainly water. I mean, certainly the management of the monsoon, the flooding issues, the green issues, particularly, the carbon sink issues, are very, very important in the city.
I think the city needs to look forward into how we will be compacting these issues in future because they are not going to go away. They're not going to disappear. We need
I
to get
think cities have to be far more important centers of governance. Today cities are completely dependent on the states,
yes.
and I think cities. I mean, these are cities of 20 million, 15 to 20 million.
Some
These are
countries don't
countries.
have that population
Yeah, these are
density.
countries in themselves. These are countries in themselves. So I think cities must be, that's why I mentioned the 73rd Amendment and the 74th Amendment.
Yes.
We've been fairly successful on the 73rd Amendment in building up panchayats. But in terms of the 74th Amendment, in terms of building up, um, I mean, no chief minister of Maharashtra would like the mayor of Bombay to be more prominent than him or her. Similarly, no chief minister in any state in Tamil Nadu would not like the mayor. So we can't even remember who the mayor is. I mean,
Yes.
Delhi, for example, well, Delhi is different because Delhi has got a state government.
Yes.
So I think urban governance is a very big issue. In India, how do we make city governments more financially more independent, financially more self-sustaining? I mean that's very very important. And to deal with public health issues like COVID, to deal
Yeah.
with environmental issues, you need city governance. You need decentralized governance. And cities are natural. I mean, there's no reason why uh, Bombay, cannot. I mean, the extreme solution is to make Bombay like Delhi. I mean, some people have suggested, to create, but that may end up creating more problems because you see, Delhi is an autonomous actor, whereas Bombay is very much part of the state of Maharashtra.
State.
You know,
Yeah.
once upon a time, of course, till 1960, this Bombay was not a city. Bombay was a city, and there was also a Bombay state. And the Bombay state got bifurcated. If you remember, in 1960, one state became Maharashtra, and one state became Gujarat, and Bombay went to Maharashtra. And there was a big agitation for this, Samyukta Maharashtra
Yes.
movement, in the late 50s and 60s, until 1960. So the idea of a composite Bombay, that was existed only till 1960, and then it got bifurcated.
Thank you so much for sparing time today, sir. I mean, I am sure you got a very busy schedule and you spared time for us. So, thank you very much, Mr. Jairam Ramesh.
Thank
It was
you, thank
real
you. Yeah, I hope this
pleasure
was of
listening to
some
you.
use. As I said, I'm not an urban planner. I don't live in the city, so therefore, this is an outsider's perspective of a
This
city
year
in
the
which
Kerala architect
we
yeah,
grew up.
this year the Kerala Architecture Festival we were looking at cities in perspective of people who have grown up in the city or who are
Yeah,
familiar with the city rather than architects and planners talking about city. We
I
wanted a
think,
different
frankly,
perspective.
there's one message I wish to convey. It's that ecology is going to be very, very important. Ecological considerations as part of urban planning. This is something that we have really not come to full grips with. And cities like Mumbai exemplify that type of
Yes.
challenge. It's not,
Yes.
city is not just physical space. It's also an ecological landscape.
Yeah.
So how you manage a
Ex-
physical space and how you manage an ecological landscape, very, very important.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
very much.
sharing the
Thank
time,
you.
and
Thank you very
it
much.
was a real pleasure listening to you.
Thank you very much.
We'll be closing today's session now. This also brings to conclusion the 2021 online edition of Kerala Architecture Festival. Spaces this year took us through a journey which spanned four major cities within India: Delhi, Kolkata, Chennai, and Mumbai, as well as three cities within Kerala: Trivandrum, Cochin, and Calicut in the last 3 weeks. We would like to thank all our speakers as well as our audience for tuning in for the last 9 sessions which spanned over 3 weekends. We hope to bring in a more elaborate event and meet all of you in person in 2022 for Kerala Architecture Festival, which will be hopefully hosted in Trivandrum. Till then, stay safe, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.